Okay, so this is the video where we are painting the banana. So we're going to start this the exact same way that we started the other fruit that are at the top of the painting. So we're going to start by painting a base coat of yellow because that's the dominant color on this fruit. And you can approach this a number of ways in terms of your paintbrush strokes. In the slideshow, I have the paintbrush strokes curving like a cylinder. So you can approach it that way, or you can simply follow the length of each side of the banana. So where the banana would be peeled into different sections. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the yellow paint is pretty thin. So you may have to layer or create multiple layers in this painting. So for this, we're just going to paint the entire thing yellow, including the stem. Now, with the banana, because this is a fruit or object that is in front of everything else on this section, this will allow you to cover up little errors in terms of, like right here, I have this drop of purple that came down too far. I can paint over that and reshape the banana. So I'm going to do that. And because the yellow is thin, it's not going to cover it real well at first. However, with multiple coats of paint, that should get fully covered. So after we get all of this base coat of yellow painted, we're going to paint the shadow colors, much like what we did with the grapefruit and the mango. Now the banana is going to have some smaller areas that you're going to have to paint in, so I would use a smaller brush in certain areas, typically around the point or the end of the banana and around the stem. So right here, I've got like a little area of white still showing. Some of the violet has covered part of my original banana sketch. So I'm just going to reshape that. And even the end of the stem, we're going to paint yellow. So once you have the entire banana painted in yellow or whatever your base color is, we are going to create a shadow color by mixing yellow with its complement, in this case, violet. And the shadow on the underside of the banana isn't super dark or strong. So it's not nearly as dark as the mango or even the apple that we will work on next. So what I'm going to do for this, I'm just going to set down a little bit of paint. This darker shadow that I'd mixed up. I'm going to set down just a little bit of this color. And then I'm going to get a brush with no paint and not yellow, but just a touch of green. And I'm going to blend that green into that shadow color that I'd made. So remember, your paint is going to blend a lot better when the paint is wet. And then I'm going to get yellow, my base, and blend it into this color. And the reason we added green is that there are hints of green around this end of the banana as well as the other end. So we want to make sure that we include that. And add just a little bit more of the shadow right in here. And as you're painting, just remember the amount of pressure that you apply can be equally as important as the amount of paint. So right now I'm just barely putting any pressure on the paper with my paintbrush. What that does, it really helps the paint blend a little more smoothly than if you were just smash the paintbrush into the painting. Now I'm going to add a bit of the shadow color at the other end, as well as just a little bit at the bottom. And we're going to blend this. I do have kind of this ridge of yellow at the bottom, but that's not a big deal. Once I paint the shadow on the table, that should blend in and cover up that portion. Now, at the top of the section, there's kind of this brighter yellow edge. So I'm just going back over this with yellow paint. Just blending this into that shadow color that I had painted originally. And we do have a lot of different kind of bruises and spots on the banana, but we will apply those in just a little bit. So we're going to let that dry. Now at the top, this is definitely more yellow, but we do have a little slight shadow on that far side of the banana. So I'm just going to take a touch of that shadow color, not very much at all. So just barely touched my brush to it. And then just a hint of green. This area is pretty small, so you will probably want to use a sharper, finer pointed brush. And I'm just going to get a little yellow to blend in the rest of this. And I have a little bit of paint left, so I'm just going to touch up some of this portion. There we are. And remember, using water is not really that great because it can thin your paint out. So if you need to clean your brush, just use a paper towel, wipe off that paint. There we go. Now for this top portion, I'm going to paint yellow on it again. And the reason for this is to really just create a second paint layer. Second coat of paint, it'll help cover things up like that purple that got a little out of control. And we also want this wet because we're going to blend in a touch of white to lighten this area up. So as you can see from the photo, there's a brighter highlight. We want to make sure that we include that. So I'm just going to get a little bit of white on my brush. And then notice the highlight is right on this edge where we kind of have that darker value popping up. So we're just gonna make a very subtle shift in the value. Now, even though yellow paint is pretty thin, the nice thing is it blends really, really easily. So you shouldn't have any problems making gradients with this color paint. Especially with white. The white and yellow blend really nicely. Kind of slipped just a little bit. So blend out that white. All right, so we're now going to look at some of these bruise marks. And I'm simply going to use the dark color that I created my shadow with. So again, this was a yellow and violet mix. And with this, you want a sharper pointed brush and just barely touch your paintbrush to these areas. So you don't want to put too much pressure, really to the point where you just have big globs of paint. So we've got a bruise right here. So right there, I probably pressed a little too hard, but this is a bigger area. So I'm just gonna very lightly go over it, kind of make that kind of fade out with the bristles of the brush. And at the very end, we have a darker spot. So to get a point on your brush, if you just spin your brush, spin it or twirl it in the paint, you'll get a nice sharp point. And let's see, we've got this mark right here. And another little bruise right here, so I'm just barely touching. Another spot on the banana right there. There's some lighter, less dark marks on the top portion of the banana. Just a few little marks and scuffs. Some on this top portion. So right now I'm just barely dragging my brush over that edge of the banana. Now, I'm also going to create the texture at the end of the banana stem. So I can use this color that I just made, but I'm gonna mix in just a little white, spin my brush again, get that nice sharp point back. So I'm just gonna paint all of this area in this kind of medium brown hue. Then I'm gonna get more white, mix it in, maybe a little more. And for this area, I'm just barely going to touch my brush in a few spots. So I don't want to cover that entire thing. Now, last thing I'm going to do, have to make my shadow that will fall under the banana. Now, my tabletop is green, so I want to work with my complement of that. Hopefully in your head you are saying red. If you did, that's correct. So I'm going to take red and green. Mix these together. And the shadow is pretty dark. So a red and green mix makes a pretty good neutral color, but I'm probably going to want to darken this even more, which can easily be done by adding just a little violet. So just get a scoop of violet, mix it in this, kind of push the darkness a little further. And this is another area where working with a detailed, smaller brush is going to be advantageous. So got a smaller brush. And the shadow starts a little bit further out. Kind of fades away. And I can use the shadow color to essentially cover up any little errors that I ran into when I was painting the bottom of the banana. So remember, holding your brush on the metal allows you to have a lot more control. And if you hold the paintbrush straight up, it allows you to get a sharper point, especially if you are spinning your brush in the paint and kind of bringing that point back. So the shadow just falls right under the banana. I could probably widen it just a little bit. I was being a little conservative with my paint. And as we approach the stem, make sure you notice how that shadow is formed. So it goes under just a little bit and then kind of falls like that. And then the shadow does fall on the dark side of the box. So what this does is kind of falls right here. And then if I use a brush that has no paint on it, I can really make this shadow fade into that green like it does in the photo. And I'm going to just add a little bit more right here. So the shadow is important because this is what lifts the banana off the box and really helps give it that 3D form. And one last little touch up, I've got kind of specks of paper that I didn't really paint over. So I'm just gonna get a little yellow, touch that up, and then we'll call it good. All right, so there is the banana.